So, I want to talk about what I recently discovered once again, and we already knew that this was coming, and so this is eventually coming, and it's coming in waves. It's already started because in some states they've lifted the moratoriums, and so the moratoriums were meant as a resource so that people could hold off on the rent, and they had time, I guess, to either gather their funds together or come up with a plan or something that they could do to try to work out an agreement with their landlords. And some people already were in trouble before the pandemic, because there were apartments that they were in that were overpriced, or they were already dealing with being rent burdened, and not getting much wage from their jobs. They're working low wage jobs, and they're just barely making the rent. And so a lot of people were in trouble. You had some people already in trouble before this pandemic started. And so looming evictions may soon make 28 million homeless in the U.S., expert says. So this is what is coming. This is a day ago that I saw this article, and this is going to be alarming. So the coronavirus pandemic could result in some 28 million Americans being evicted, an expert has said. And so by comparison, 10 million people lost their homes in the Great Recession. And so here's what they can expect from this crisis, which now they're calling it the pandemic or the coronavirus crisis. So Emily Benfer began her career representing homeless families in Washington, D.C. So her first case involved a family that had been evicted after complaining to the landlord about holes in their roof. So one of the times that she met with a family, one of the children, a 4-year-old girl, asked her, "Are you really going to help us?" So Benfer struggled with how to answer that question. So I met them too late, and then they couldn't stop the eviction. So they already went ahead with the process. So they had already been sleeping on the subway and in other people's homes, and you could see the effects of this taking place. And so today, Benfer is leading experts. She's the leading expert on evictions, or the process of evictions. So she's the chair of the American Bar Association Task Force Committee on Eviction, and the co-creator of the COVID-19 Housing Policy Scorecard with Eviction Lab at Princeton University. So throughout the public health crisis, Benfer has been investigating how states are dealing with evictions and sharing what she finds in a public database. So CNBC spoke to Benfer about coming evictions crisis that is coming and what can be done to turn it around. And I'll be honest with you, I think they're too late on this issue, because I've already done multiple videos on the homeless crisis that was happening before the pandemic. So now you have people that are going to be possibly evicted because of not being able to come up with the back rent when they lost their jobs. And there's been a lot of people that have lost jobs. So how does the eviction crisis that's brought on by the pandemic compare to 2008 housing crisis? And so we have never seen this extent of eviction in such a truncated amount of time in history. And so we can expect that this to increase dramatically in the coming weeks and months, especially as the limited support of intervention measures are in place are about to expire. And so I want to brace you all for what is about to be a catastrophic overhaul of basically just people being put off onto the streets and not having a place to stay. So we already had the homeless crisis, and so now it's going to be a situation where you're going to have people of all walks of life that have no place to go, and they're going to probably warehouse them. And so basically, from what I've been reading, there's some places, some temporary shelters that are set up, and they look almost like FEMA camps. They have like little pallets or a little mat and a little like trunk, and it looks like, something that you would see like if somebody was in a war-torn situation, war-torn country. And it's really sad. And so they have these things that are set up for not only people who are sick with coronavirus, tent camps, but they also have places that look like they're places for people who just don't have anywhere to go to sleep. So about 10 million people over a period of years were displaced from their homes following the foreclosure in 2008. So those of you that remember that, and we're looking at 20 million to about 28 million people in this moment between now and September facing eviction. And so that's in 2020. And so the study of the intersection of housing and health, CNBC, what will all the evictions mean for people's health during this pandemic? So eviction negatively impacts the trajectory of the individual's life, and it can do that in a permanent way. So studies demonstrated that eviction causes increased mortality rates. It can cause respiratory distress, which in the COVID pandemic can put people in even greater risk of peril, and in results of depression, suicides, and other poor health outcomes. The primary response to COVID-19 has been to shelter in place. But if there's an increase of homelessness, one economist estimates homelessness could rise to about 40% this year, and that could spread also the virus, because you have people that are out there on the streets, or either they're in these warehoused temporary shelter facilities, and that means less social distancing and more people that are clustered together, and you don't know who's sick or who could be sick with the virus. So you've been keeping track of what states are doing to protect tenants, mostly through this eviction moratorium. So the moratoriums, I'm adding in here that they just were halting the rent. They weren't canceling the rent. And so they had a lot of little groups that were saying that they wanted to cancel the rent, or they wanted to try to just forgive the rent during the months of the pandemic. And a lot of people were on board with this. Some of these people are doing this as a militant stance against the fact that they have lost jobs of no fault of their own due to the pandemic. So why would you expect them to come up with rent when they've lost their jobs during a crisis? And so that is the reason why some people are banding together. But however, I'm going to add this in there. A lot of landlords also are not able to pay their mortgages, so they're also in a jam. And also people are also suffering, because you do have people who are trying to pay as much as they can, and they're trying to make as better as they can on the rent, do as much as they can. But they're maybe one step away from being homeless, and they're fighting to not be homeless. And there are also people that are in apartment dwellings that have pretty much, before the pandemic, they weren't paying rent, or they were abusing their situation that they have in terms of this halt of the rent. And so they're making it hard for the others to live in those areas. And so they're, problem tenants also that are in the mix of all of this. And so when you protect tenants that really do need housing, you're also looking at protecting the ones that are troublesome tenants that are causing trouble for people who really do need housing, and they're making it hard for people to just live. And so you have a mix of a lot of things going on. Then you have this pandemic and the disease, and people are very uncertain about their work, if they're even going to have a job to go back to, and if it's even safe to go back to a job, if there is a job to go back to. So there's a lot going on. So you've been keeping track, going back to the article, of what are you doing to protect tenants. So mostly through eviction moratoriums. But like I told you, people are suffering in all different areas. So how do you feel about the efforts that have fallen short? And so they asked her this question. So some of the moratoriums are lifted, to different segments of the population and in the duration, their duration. So they are also not coupled with financial assistance to ensure that the renters don't accrue this backed up debt. And so that's the problem. That's the reason why you have some groups saying cancel the rent, because there's backed up debt during the pandemic. People who lost jobs, and then there are people that are taking advantage of the situation as well. So you have that all in there. And they're stabilized enough to stay in their units. So another issue is that in some states, landlords were allowed to go forward with evictions and even receive an order of eviction, and it was only forestalled by the execution stage. At this execution stage, so that means that there are a number of evictions that are just waiting for the sheriffs to execute right now. So there are a lot of evictions that are going to be coming up as soon as the moratoriums lift. So the moment the moratoriums are lifted, those families will be immediately put out. And right now, 29 states lack any state level moratorium against evictions. Because of the pandemic, a lot of these evictions are unfolding over videos and phone instead of the courtroom. So what they're doing is Zoom presentations, where you use Zoom. So what are the issues that come up with this? So even prior to the pandemic, the system was very challenging for tenants to navigate to raise their rights. 90% of the tenants across the country are unrepresented. So when you consider that people are now choosing between rent and food for their families, they are also unlikely to be able to pay for minutes on their phone and Wi-Fi to log into the remote hearings. So appearance itself may be very challenging, and if they fail to appear, if they weren't able to dial in, or if they don't have the right link to Zoom, that's considered a failure to appear, which results in a default judgment for the property owner. So what can be done to make the eviction crisis less devastating? So these were questions from CNBC that they were giving to Bennifer. And so as an immediate measure, we need a nationwide uniform moratorium on evictions, and it has to be coupled with financial assistance to ensure that the renter can stay housed without shifting the debt burden onto the property owners. So the owners that are most likely to be affected in the eviction crisis now are those that have small properties and don't have financial cushions to make ends meet over a period of months when they're not receiving that rent. And so once that's in place, we really need to start addressing the root cause of the eviction crisis and the lack of affordability in housing. And so that's pretty much the article. That's a short article. And so that's just one article about what is about to occur. And so I'm pretty much sticking to what is going on. Fear of a wave of homelessness. And so this is what's the big deal right now. And so experts fear the end of eviction moratoriums could plunge thousands of people into homelessness. And so this also was July 3rd, 2020 by Yelena Dehanova. And so eviction moratoriums nationwide are set to expire later this month, potentially thrusting tens of thousands of people into housing crises. Congress in March had passed a federal mandate prohibiting eviction and foreclosure until July 24th. So in response to the coronavirus pandemic. So the deadline quickly is approaching. Experts warn unless Congress passes more relief, renters might be forced out on the street. And so eviction moratoriums nationwide are set to expire later this month, potentially thrusting thousands of people out into the streets. And Congress in March passed a federal mandate prohibiting evictions and foreclosures until July 24th. So in response to the coronavirus pandemic, but as the deadline is approaching, experts warn unless Congress passes relief, renters might be forced out on the streets. And that's what they're working on now, is trying to pass some other type of relief. Some people are going to be able to benefit from it, while others may not. And so be mindful of that. Across the country, thousands of evictions are either pending or in processing, possibly setting up a wave of newly homeless people in the next few months. So the pandemic has pushed millions of Americans into unemployment, leaving many unable to keep up with monthly rent and food demands. So, and this is out of Tucson, Arizona. The courts are processing an average of 52 evictions cases, up to about a normal 10 to 30 cases, according to the Arizona Daily Star. So in Tennessee, more than 9,000 eviction hearings are pending, about 33% more cases than normal for that time of the year. And so in the Memphis Commercial Appeal reported, so homeless and housing services experts in New York are seeing signs that there will be a spike in the population of newly homeless people in the coming months as well. And I want to add in there, Los Angeles is another one. Like we already had Skid Row, it expanded. We had a huge homeless crisis here, and that just seemed to halt when the pandemic came. And so it's going to even be more exacerbated because of what's going on. The unemployment and a lot of people being out of work, and then you have more people that are going to get evicted. So no concrete data yet exists that quantifies quantifies the number of newly homeless people nationally. So in New York, we still anecdotally have seen some people become newly homeless due to the informal evictions, particularly the people who did not have a formal lease in their name. Jacqueline Simone, policy analyst at Coalition for the Homeless. Large numbers of people were paying week by week for room rentals and lost their source of income due to the pandemic. Many people have become newly homeless because they might not have realized that their protections were, or what there were, if they had any at all, and calls for congressional relief. And so the CARES Act, which became law in late March, put a temporary pause on evictions and foreclosures as millions of Americans grapple with the economic turmoil brought on by the pandemic. So that relief extends only to federally assisted properties. So from state to state, the moratorium degrees vary widely. Some states like Connecticut, Washington, New York have put in place their own temporary bans on evictions that last into August. So they may have a little bit of time, while others, it may not last into August. According to the data compiled in Eviction Lab, an organization based in Princeton University that dedicated to tracking eviction rates, the moment these moratoriums are lifted, we'll see massive evictions. Emily Bennifer has stated. So, visiting associate clinical professor of law at Columbia Law School. So, inconsistency has caught the attention of notable politicians who argue that the federal moratorium has to be strengthened and extended for a longer period of time to ensure people do not lose access to their homes. House Democrats on Monday passed a bill that would halt eviction foreclosures all the way through to March 2021. The bill billion allocated to rental assistance programs, $75 billion relief fund for homeowners. The bill is not expected to pass though. So that's the thing. Even though that's what they put on the table, it's not expected to pass. So which is expected to reconvene July 20th from its 2-week 4th of July recess. And so this is what we're seeing. This is what right here. This is Los Angeles. And so it says, this is Robert King Gesser, 35 years old, after 2 years of living on the street, stands out in front of the 10 on the 110 freeway, just above it, during the novel coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic in LA, California on May 25th, 2020. So this is how it looks in Los Angeles and all in other parts of the LA area region. This is what was happening before the pandemic. So just think of what's going to happen after this whole thing, the moratoriums lift. it's going to be a lot worse. And so state and local eviction moratoriums are expiring rapidly. Courts are beginning to address the backlog in the new eviction cases. And Diane Yentl, Representative CEO, National Low Income Housing Coalition, the call with reporters Monday. And they're putting people out of their homes in the middle of the pandemic and in places where the COVID is raging out of control. So Senator Elizabeth Warren, also on Monday, she introduced a bill calling for the nationwide eviction moratorium to last all the way until March of 2021, which I just said that they're probably more than likely they may not be able to pass that. If they lose their job, it says this bill was put in place so it protects renters from losing their housing. Warren said that's the call that she made on Monday. So if they lose their job, they have their hours cut. The crisis, she said, and during this crisis, the bill extends the moratorium, or federal moratorium, to last a year instead of just 120 days as it was. And so it expands the moratorium to cover basically all renters as well. So it's not just one group. But here's the problem with this. I'm going to stop in the middle of this. The problem with this is that you have some people that are abusing this moment. Before the pandemic, they weren't maybe good about trying to keep up with their rent or making agreements or trying to even pay. And so they were taking advantage. And now this happened, it pretty much exacerbates it. And so you have these people that are making it unsafe to live for the people who really need a place to stay. And so they have not included that in there. They don't know what it's like living in these buildings where you have some people who are taking advantage of this pandemic, and they're pretty much using it as an excuse to be violent towards other tenants. They're they're abusing the rules because they figure that the landlords don't have a lot of access to actually go ahead and evict them. So you have incidences where maybe before this pandemic happened, the people were grossly behind in their rent for whatever the reasons. Some people do have excuses that are valid, while others just were taking advantage of a situation, and now they're taking more advantage. And so that is what landlords, and not only landlords, even other tenants who really need a place to stay, are feeling that they're living in unsafe situations because they're living around people who are taking advantage of this pandemic. And so that's also a crisis, and these people are not seeing this. Elizabeth Warren, all these other people who I know their intentions are good. They're trying to help people from being homeless. But while you have people who are taking advantage of the situation to people who really need homes, you have to also look at that and consider that as an issue. That's a crisis that's going on as well. It's making situations that are already bad even worse. And so it expands the moratorium to cover basically all renters. And so that's where the problem lies. All renters. Not all renters are people who just, lost their jobs, or maybe they need help. They need a place to stay. You have some people who were already taking advantage. Maybe they're squatters. So they're making it dangerous in some of these situations to live in these places. So it also makes sure that the renters don't get hit with fees, penalties, if they need a few extra months to pay their rent. And so a tsunami of evictions across the country. Okay, that is about to happen. Homeless service experts are watching for the signs of the number of newly homeless people that will spike once the eviction halt ends or moratorium ends. So New York, number of single adult men checking themselves into homeless shelters has gone up on 4 nights in June, and a period of time when we would not be hitting new records normally. Simone, the coalition for the homeless said, so during other years, the single adult count in the homeless shelters normally declined during this time. So instead, we're hitting new records for single adults in shelters, and that's just the shelters run by the Department of Homeless Services, Simone added. So it is unusual to be seeing the trends that I am anticipating that we are going to continue seeing the trends as protections for people facing eviction begin to expire. So additionally, the Coalition for the Homeless has received an influx of people calling in to ask about shelter access in New York City, questions that people who are new to the homeless services system might ask. And so the indicators are among what prompted the nonprofits and advocacy groups to urge federal government to pass rental assistance laws, prevent tsunami evictions, Simone said. So California, one organization that provides homeless services, has opened up 7 new shelters since February to respond to the surge in people needing places to stay. So we set up 600 new beds and 700 new beds just since COVID has started. So this is Joel Roberts, CEO of People Assisting the Homeless in California. But the homeless is gradual. It's a gradual process. So indicators like these that point to potential rising population of homeless people form just a tip of the iceberg. So someone who gets evicted from their home because they're unable to pay will likely go couch surfing, and they'll call up friends and family to ask if they can stay in their houses. And so we're seeing this around Los Angeles and everywhere in surrounding areas. Skid Row had expanded, and so this right here is Manhattan. And so Manhattan, San Francisco, some of all the cities, this is LA, are all looking like this, and it's going to be more of this all over the place. And so this is what they're trying to prevent from happening. So racial inequity. Okay, so the transition to homelessness is different for each person. So it could be a month or so that these people try living out of their cars, Robert added, but if there's no steady income coming in, a person living out of the car might resort to selling it for money. And then they start knocking on past doors, Robert said. So it's not all of a sudden that everyone's going to get kicked out of their apartments. They're all ending up on the street. It's not that quick, so it's a gradual process. So racial inequity. People most at risk for being evicted ended up newly homeless will be normally people of color. According to the homeless experts, 25% Black and Latino renters said that they're either deferred or did not pay rent. They deferred or did not pay rent in May, according to the results of a survey. Urban Institute in Washington, D.C. think tank focuses on economic research, so about 14% of white renters responded the same way. So you see the number or the percentage is a lot lower. So the survey also asked renters to rate their confidence level on being able to pay rent in the month of June. About a quarter of white renters said that they had a slight or no confidence in being able to pay rent that month, while about half of the Black and Latino renters said the same thing. And so when they look at historically faced evictions in housing courts and predominantly people of color, when we look at the people who are currently in shelters on the streets, once again, predominantly people of color, Simone added, in Boston, 70% of eviction filings occur in communities where people of color make up a majority of residents, according to WBUR News. So there are no official numbers in the Department of Housing and Urban Development on how many people are projected to face eviction when the moratorium ends this month. Let me stop here. There are already people that are like maybe more than $20,000 in the hole of not being able to pay their rent. And it's going to get worse. And some of these people are living as squatters in some of these apartments. In South LA, I personally know this. I'm not going to name any names of people because that's privacy is all there. But I personally know there's some people that are $20,000, maybe $30,000 in debt in terms of rent, their rent burden, and they're already an eviction pending for them, and there's multiple people like that, and no amount of money that they don't have the money saved up, they don't have any other source of income, and then by losing jobs or having hours cut, there's no way that they can come up with that amount of cash. And so that's just to give you a sort of an idea of what some people are up against. And then you have some people who are willingly not working with landlords because they're angry because of the fact that the rent was already pretty high in some of these low income neighborhoods. They were rent burdened. They were working jobs that were, they're usually jobs that are frontline jobs, but they don't pay very well. And so, this is going to exacerbate the problem. And then we already had homelessness in Los Angeles and Los Angeles County. So getting back to the article, it says there's no official numbers once this thing ends that they can come up with just yet. But the office did not immediately respond for the request for comment from CNBC. But that's because they know it's going to be crazy. So I'm just warning you guys to brace yourself for what could be possible anarchy, because you not only have these moratoriums that are at some point they have to end, because the landlords can't keep hanging on and not getting their rent, and they have to go ahead with these processes of eviction. Some have already started because their livelihood is just also hanging on the balance. And then you also have businesses that have closed. You have people that are unemployed. You have also, believe it or not, I'm going to add this in there, they were proposing that they were going to close the central jail, which is better known as the LA County Jail, because of all of the backlash that they're getting about the police brutality and then the bad treatments in these jails. Plus, not only that, the COVID, the pandemic, having overcrowding of jail cells is a problem. 8,000 more inmates are going to be released within this month. And so some of those people had a year left, or maybe they had low-level crimes. Then you have some, maybe they didn't go in there for low-level crimes. They just had a year left of their sentence. And so with the homelessness, the COVID, and then the possible evictions, and then people being just let out of prison, they need places to be too as well. And so if their families are put out on the street, it's a recipe for disaster. So you guys need to be protected. You need to really be forewarned that this is going to be a mess load of trouble. And I'm just telling you like it is. They have on Yahoo all of these black influencers talking about mental health. But nobody's talking about this right here. You've seen like neighborhoods where there's been problems and they say, why are they burning down their neighborhoods? But you'll see people say these neighborhoods aren't our neighborhoods. We don't own them. Because other people from the outside come in and open up and set up shop, and they own the businesses, and the black people don't own the businesses. And so that has been a huge problem. And now you have this homeless issue going on. And already you have some places that were already kind of sketchy to live in. And in other words, they were dangerous neighborhoods, or neighborhoods that had danger in and of itself. But now it's even more danger because you have people who were squatters that weren't paying their rent even before the pandemic. And now this pandemic, when they halted the rents, it made it easy for them to just kind of like be even more relaxed about not paying their rent. And so they're making it hard for people who really do need a place to stay. So what do you do about a situation like that? So getting back to this article, it says that the office did not respond for comment. That's why, because it's a mess. It is a huge mess, and they're not talking more about this. And so in California, I believe it's 6.5% of the population is black Americans, and yet 40% of the homeless population is black. Okay, so there's a disproportionate number of people on the street, and that they are Black Americans and people of color. Roberts of Path said, so it's not just simply a crisis of people getting evicted. Let me tell you, more people are going to be homeless, and there's going to be more chaos and more craziness. Brace yourselves, because if you thought it was bad already, it's going to get worse. It is going to get worse. And then I also was looking that they said some of these businesses are closing permanently because of what has been happening. There's been great loss of money, and they're not talking about this, and it's crazy. And so all these people that are on here talking about people's mental health, let me tell you something. You can talk about all the mental health programs you want, but when you put people on the street, when you give people no option, when you make them lose their job, when there's sickness all over the place, it's a recipe for disaster, straight out. And it's going to be crazy, whether you like it or not. And then already with the racial issues that are going on, you haven't seen nothing yet. Thanks for listening.